billion plan. The gynecologist found guilty of leaving women in pain. And Tiger digs deep to take an early open lead.
From ITN, the ITV Nightly News with Dermot Monaghan.
Good evening. Police investigating the abduction and murder of Sarah Payne today reported what they called a very significant discovery. It's a shoe which they believe was Sarah's, found in a Sussex hedgerow a few miles from where her body was found. Police have also interviewed some campers who heard screams the night the 8-year-old went missing. ITN's Tim Rogers has the latest on a crime which has touched thousands of hearts.
Still, they are coming, hour after hour, bringing with them flowers and sympathy. And they are coming not only from the neighbouring community, but from across the country. Such is the sense of outrage for a life so cruelly taken. The police have been inching closer in their search for the killer, sifting and combing for evidence along the narrow Sussex lanes, close to where Sarah Payne's body was found. Their first real breakthrough has been the discovery of what they believe to be one of her shoes. Just a few days ago, they displayed identical shoes and a similar dress to one Sarah was wearing at the time of her abduction. The real shoe was discovered close to the village of Coolham by a local woman, and police hope it'll provide useful forensic evidence.
Two things that can give us, we will be looking for it forensically. One is signs of, confirmation that it's Sarah's, and then we know in a sense the route that the individual, the killer, has taken with her. The other one obviously is anything of the killers, either by way of fibre transfer, fingerprints, DNA, that's left on it by the killer.
It also emerged today that 8-year-old Sarah was probably murdered on the day she was abducted. The site where her body was found has now been cleared, but such were the condition of her remains that the actual cause of her death still hasn't been discovered. But as the police search continues, more and more people are coming to this roadside to express their condolences and for quiet contemplation. Many are leaving in tears. Tim Rogers, ITN, West Sussex.
The Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott announced a 10-year transport plan today to get Britain moving, as he put it. The total price tag is £180 billion, with nearly a third of that to come from the private sector. Joe Andrews has the details.
John Prescott left both Jags behind today and walked, apparently discovering the joys of summer on the way, before delivering his prescription for our creaking transport system. He says it means spending £180 billion in 10 years. It isn't all extra cash, although there are big increases in there. Instead, it's the total transport budget, private and public, rail and road. But even Mr Prescott admits things will take time to improve.
Whether you widen the road or whether you build a bypass or whether you actually build a new part of the railway system, there is going to be some inconvenience. But at least you know we're not dealing with the symptoms, we're dealing with the cause, and we're going to get a transport system this country's worthy of.
The 10-year transport plan earmarks £59 billion for investment in road improvements, including 100 new bypasses. The railways get £60 billion, part of that to be used to reduce train fares. And local transport, including London, gets nearly £50 billion, with big improvements for rural bus services.
The Right Honourable Gentleman must think that the British people were all born yesterday. The travelling public will not be fooled. Labour has made promises before. People are still waiting.
There are also plans for 25 inner-city light railways like this one in Sheffield, a programme of building low-noise road surfaces and major widening projects like the A1, seen here north of Newcastle.
I'm very disappointed about some of the plans to increase road building, but overall the package, although heavily delayed for 3 years, is now very welcome.
The problem for the government is that things may well get worse before they get better because of growing congestion combined with new construction. As it is, this plan doesn't start rolling out until next April, and ministers may well find there's precious little to show for 4 years in office by the time the next election comes. Joe Andrews, ITN, Westminster.
The ITV regulator, the Independent Television Commission, today ordered the network to move this programme, the Nightly News, to an earlier time. The ITC said it would be issuing what it called a legally binding direction. It's concerned about the fall in ITV news audiences since the old News at 10 was axed. ITV said it was considering its position. Richard Neal, the gynaecologist accused of leaving dozens of women in agony with unnecessary or botched operations, was found guilty today on 34 of the 35 charges heard by the General Medical Council. He now faces being struck off the medical register and sued by his patients. Here's Harry Smith.
Mr. Neal, do you have anything to say?
Richard Neal left the disciplinary hearing giving no answers to the questions which still hang over him. He left in disgrace, found guilty of performing operations without consent and of substandard surgery. Despite being banned from working in Canada, the gynaecologist had been able to find work at the Friarage Hospital in Northallerton in Yorkshire. The inquiry was told that for 2 decades he left a trail of emotional and physical destruction behind him. A coachload of his former patients were at the hearing. Some of them have been left in agonising pain after being treated by Neal, unable to have children. The inquiry also found him guilty of lying about his qualifications when he applied for a job which would have put him in a position to assess other doctors' fitness to practice. One former patient who helped lead the campaign to bring him to justice told ITN tonight of her reaction to the committee's ruling.
What does it feel like? Oh, that's wonderful. 2 years of round-the-clock campaigning to get him stopped. So they've got to stop him. They've got to now.
The committee will decide next week whether or not Neal should be struck off. But that's unlikely to be the end of the matter. He could then face a flood of legal actions from women both here and in Canada. And police in Canada, who are looking into a further 40 allegations of professional misconduct, are still trying to decide whether or not to apply for extradition. Harry Smith, ITN, at the General Medical Council.
And relatives of the patients killed by the GP Harold Shipman today won their court battle for the inquiry to be heard in public. The families had argued that an open inquiry was necessary to restore faith in the medical profession. The High Court rejected the Health Secretary's arguments that it should be held in private to allow witnesses to speak more freely. The Northern Ireland Secretary Peter Mandelson has tonight rejected claims of a rift with the Chancellor Gordon Brown over Britain's entry into the single European currency. Mr. Mandelson, speaking at a fundraising event in London, said he fully supported the government's stance of waiting for economic conditions to be right. The Prime Minister is tonight in Okinawa in Japan for the G8 Economic Summit, which opens tomorrow. This time, leaders of 4 of the world's poorest countries have been invited as well. With the agenda, here's our political editor, John Sargent.
Tony Blair arrived this evening for an economic summit which is designed to show that the richest countries in the world can provide practical help for the poorest. Japan is preparing to spend an enormous amount on the summit itself, an estimated £500 million. But the subjects under discussion could hardly be more serious. They include the terrifying spread of AIDS in Africa and also the crippling debts which developing countries are still being forced to pay.
We're doing everything we can to help the developing world in terms of relief from high levels of debt and also tackling some of the diseases like AIDS and malaria that are killing thousands of people in the developing world, and which we could do something to help if we really had the international will behind it.
Security at the summit is swallowing a large part of the costs. After the demonstrations which disrupted the World Trade talks in Seattle last year, the organisers are hoping that protests can easily be contained. Mr. Blair is hoping that the summit will set clear targets for speeding up the international efforts to combat AIDS and other diseases. He's also hoping that the G8 countries will put into effect the promise they made at Cologne last year to wipe out $100 billion of the debts that the poorest countries are being forced to pay. John Sargent, ITN, Okinawa.
The mutual insurance company Equitable Life put itself up for sale today after it lost a legal battle which could cost it £1.5 billion. It was over the bonuses it must pay to 90,000 of its pension policyholders. Here's John Draper.
The decision by the law lords may have been low-key, but they found 4,000 of policyholders and against Equitable Life.
I would dismiss the appeal of the society.
At the Equitable Life, we never play fast and loose with your money.
But not everyone agreed when they sold policies guaranteeing minimum annuity payouts and then said it would cost too much. Furious members began legal proceedings.
It's an Equitable Life, Henry.
The
members' action group say it is, now they've won.
They feel vindicated by the reaction both the appeal court and now the House of Lords in supporting them and saying, no, the contract you took out is the one you've got, and Equitable have got to stand by that.
Some will get hundreds, even thousands more a year, though others will get less. While Equitable, the world's oldest mutual, will be sold off to raise the £1.5 billion it'll cost.
It is obviously a very sad day when, after 238 years as a mutual, we are no longer able to continue, but we have to act in the best interests of our members. It's been in the best interests of our members to date to operate as a mutual.
The decision here at the House of Lords isn't just about Equitable Life, it could affect other insurance companies too. Potentially hundreds of thousands of pension holders could argue that the return they're getting is not what they were promised when they took out their investment. John Draper, ITN, at the House of Lords.
The people of a town in the Caucasus Mountains in southern Russia have been watching it being torn apart by floods and mudslides following heavy rain. At least 7 people have been killed. Our report on the disaster is by our Moscow correspondent Mark Webster.
Torrential rain brought the wall of mud crashing through the streets of Tinnos, forcing hundreds of people to flee from their homes. Terrified residents were plucked from the roofs of their apartment buildings and carried to safety by helicopter. The tidal wave of mud even threatened to destroy the foundations of some of the poorly constructed buildings in the town. Though the emergency airlift saved many people from death, they could only watch helplessly from higher ground as their homes and workplaces disappeared under the mudslide. Electricity and water supplies to the town have been cut, and there is a growing fear of disease. The authorities were praised for their prompt reaction, but there's also been criticism that nothing was done to prevent the disaster, despite frequent warnings of the danger. This dam collapsed in a similar rainstorm less than 2 years ago. Designed to protect the town, the local authority didn't have the money to repair it. While hundreds will be sleeping rough tonight on the hillsides around the town, there are fears of further rainfall. Only once the rain has subsided will they be allowed back into the town to their ruined homes. Mark Webster, ITN, Moscow.
Well, now to golf and the Millennium Open at St Andrews. The formidable Tiger Woods shared the lead for a long time today with the first round 67. That's 5 under par. Later on, Ernie Els returned to 66, but Tiger said he was still pretty pleased with his day's work. David Cowan reports.
A case of so near yet so far for Colin Montgomerie. It was a frustrating end of the first day's play for the Scot, who finished 1 under par. No such problems to the man who's runaway favourite for this championship. Tiger Woods had an uncharacteristically low-key start to his day. It was the 9th before he began to edge up the scoreboard. After that, business as usual. The world's #1 came within a whisker of a spectacular success at the 14th. He displayed his strength to blast himself out of trouble at the 17th and ended his day 5 under par with a round of 67. Not a bad day's work for the man who could win the Grand Slam at the home of golf.
Pretty pleased. To go out there and not hit the ball as well as I'd like, and to be able to shoot the score I did, and I'm very pleased because you're going to have to make some good par putts, lag the ball real well, and I was able to do that today. I had some pretty good lag putts today.
At the 17th, Tiger's old college roommate Nota Begay brought back memories of the finish at last year's Open, but unlike Jean van der Veld, he escaped the water with ease. And this evening, Ernie Els fired a warning shot across Tiger's bows. The South African finished 6 under par, edging 1 shot ahead of the world's #1. David Cowan, ITN, St Andrews.
The headlines again. Police investigating the abduction and murder of Sarah Payne are carrying out tests on a shoe which they believe was hers. They're calling it a significant discovery. Tonight's financial figures and the FTSE 100 share index moved up slightly in a quiet day's trading, closing 3.6 points higher. On Wall Street, the Dow was up almost 150 points and the pound rose strongly against the dollar. It picked up more than 1.5 cents. Well, now let's look at the papers. And the Times leads on the Richard Neal case at the GMC. It says the scandal is a blow to the medical profession's attempts at self-regulation. George Clooney is pictured at the premiere of his new film in Birmingham. The Telegraph says that the Neal case is damaging to the GMC, which let him practice here for 11 years. It pictures Cherie Blair and Cilla Black receiving honorary fellowships at Liverpool University. The Mail also has the Richard Neal story. It quotes a relative of one of his victims who said the decision to convict him has come too late for the patients whose lives he ruined. The Express says that the standard of care in NHS casualty units is unacceptable. It also has that picture of Cherie Blair and Cilla Black. And the Sun claims that the Home Secretary's car has been stopped by police for speeding. It says Jack Straw was a passenger at the time. It also reports that Hollywood stars Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston are to get married next week. And that's it for now. The ITV Evening News is at 6:30 tomorrow. Do try and join us again at 11. From me and the entire team here with the ITV Nightly News tonight. Goodbye.